All right, thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon for the Corning Value session. The session will be led by Hank Jonas. He is our Manager of Organization Effectiveness. Just a couple of items before we get started here. I want to make sure if you are not currently on mute, please put your microphones on mute so that we can avoid any outside disturbances. And then questions are encouraged in this session. If you have any questions whatsoever, please put them in the chat using the chat function. The chat function is the little icon that's in the bottom of your screen, the third icon from the right that looks like a little thought bubble. So when you have a question, hit that little thought bubble. A little field will pop up where you can type your question in there, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions shortly after Hank's presentation. Hank, take it away.
Etsy, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to join you all. And my thanks to Jess and Karen and the whole team here. I'm honored to present to you a little presentation that we used portions of this internally within Corning and the Corning values. And I hope it'll be fun for you today. I've got a little bit of interactive stuff to do, and so let's get started. A lot of the information that we are going to be sharing is just information that you might want to just keep to yourself. There's no business data or anything like that. The Corning values actually are out there on the Corning external website, but just with some of my comments, you might want to just keep these the information proprietary to yourself. Thank you. So what I got a little bit from Jess was a little bit of a profile. Looks like we have upwards of 30 and maybe more so today, but the information about you all that she sent did a quick word cloud of all the different degrees that are represented by you all. And the bigger the font size, the more instances that those were mentioned. So not surprisingly for Corning Incorporated, we are a technology company, engineering and innovation. And so you can see that with a lot of the different degrees that you have earned. So congratulations on that. And the information that Jess sent me, boy, I was kind of blown away. There were more than 60 different colleges and universities represented by you all. Some close here to upstate New York, where our headquarters is located, and some quite far away. So very diverse group today. A little bit about me is, oops, let me just annotate the shared content. Close that. Actually, last week was my 30th anniversary in Corning. That's still a little shocking to me. I've had a number of different careers over a long work history, and I had never been, before joining Corning, I had never been in any one place, one job for more than maybe 5 years. So it's just pretty amazing, and it speaks to how great our company is. That when you come here and you perform well and you grow and develop in your job, we'd like to keep people around. So it's not unusual for a lot of folks in Corning to have pretty long careers here. You can see my my professional degree. I have actually a bachelor's degree in psychology, 2 master's degrees, and then a little bit later in life, I decided to really switch gears and earn my PhD in organizational behavior in the School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. So anybody who's around the Ohio area probably certainly heard of Case. And some of the responsibilities that I have for Corning are, you can see there, a lot of our talent processes, global talent processes, performance management, career development. You can read the list there. And I do partner with some colleagues on a few of these, but in most cases, I am sort of the recognized subject matter expert for all of these talent processes around the world. And I'd like to put this last item in there. Probably my very first career was I like to say I was an entrepreneur. I was in college, it's my junior year, I think, in St. Louis, Missouri, and I started with several college roommates, a record store. So I know for many of you, you might be excited by that because records are coming back, right? And vinyl is happening. So I always like to mention that in Corning because we are a business that I was originally an entrepreneur before I got into HR. All right. So here's our agenda today. I want to first set some context because you've probably heard this phrase. I think the Chinese, it was attributed to the as a Chinese curse, but then I looked it up recently. I don't really think it came from China, but the phrase was something like, "Curse be to you, may you live in interesting times." And certainly, my goodness, we are living in some very interesting, somewhat chaotic times. So I want to set a little context, none of which will surprise you. And then we're going to do a short video that we produced a few years ago on the Corning values when we decided we needed to kind of remarket the values internally because we had so many new employees around the world. So if the technology cooperates, we're gonna take a look at that video. It's less than 5 minutes. Then I'll just give a little bit of an overview of some of the history of Corning's values and how they came to be. And then we'll launch into them. And I hope that you got email to you from Jess and Etienne, the little brochure that outlines the 7 values. And if you've had a chance to look that over, then this will all totally make sense. But if you haven't, that's okay. We can kind of go through the 7 values themselves. And then most importantly, the values are, a lot of companies have them. You walk into a room, you see a nice poster on the wall with the values there. But in Corning, we like to say it's not just about having a poster on the wall. It's about really living these values, all 7, all the time, all around the world, every day. So we're going to give a few examples that I picked out, some of which are very, very new things. A lot of them in response to the wild times that we're going through these days, and then summarize and wrap up. Where we are today, I just pulled this out of a webinar that I was going through a few weeks ago. As you know, we're officially in a recession. The economy has shrunk. The number of people now that are working from home, like I am today, is this is a percentage of companies that have basically embraced permanent work remote option for employees. I think Facebook and Google are some of the most notable companies that basically recently announced that they were going to essentially have people working from home full time. I don't think Corning will quite go that far. We are a manufacturing company, so we have to have people, in many of our locations. But it is quite a change that folks have gone through to essentially adjust to this new work environment that we're in. And then, sorry about that. Certainly going along with the recessionary aspect that we're in, the U.S. unemployment rate, and this is as of May, it's probably ticked up a little bit. And then, disturbingly, but maybe not surprisingly, just the whole level of just anxiety around the world as people have to cope with the pandemic. This is from another survey, as the number of U.S. adults reporting, anxiety, higher anxiety and symptoms of either anxiety or depression or both. It's really something that in Corning we are reminding our employees of, of the services that are available and the resources that are available for this. And I don't think any one of us are immune from it. Then you can move across, you can kind of see how universities have obviously been, as you know, really, really hit with the impact of the pandemic. In many of the cases of folks at your age, they've decided, many have decided, not to attend university, even if they were accepted. And so the number of folks that are going to take a gap year, has definitely gone up. And then for leaders, really what it comes down to is a fundamental dilemma that we're all dealing with, and every state is dealing with it, as you see all the reopening or not reopening, or you see some of the states where the number of cases are going up, and it's fundamentally the issue of, do we protect lives, or do we protect livelihoods in terms of, the economic aspect? So that is a fundamental dilemma, I think, that all leaders are being challenged to figure out how to navigate through. And certainly in our case in Corning, we are in New York State, but New York State is actually reporting some of them, even though we had, the worst case in New York City and things, we're reporting better numbers, reduced hospitalizations and things like that. So the whole reentry is something that we're starting to look at across all of our locations. And then naturally and really painfully, we've all in the last few weeks, month or so, are dealing with the George Floyd situation, the latest police killing in Atlanta, and that's caused all of us to not just pause, but to decide, what actions can we take culturally and around the world, because it's not just here in the U.S. I mean, these incidents happening in the U.S., but we're seeing the reaction to them all around the world. So, how do we as a company, react to that and take a stand to help change the culture around whether it's Black Lives Matter, the whole issue of justice for all. So context, before we jump into the values, it's important to kind of get a sense of recognizing kind of where we are to get today all together. So let me just see if I can click on a little bit of a video. Like I say, this is a video that we created, I think it was about 5 years ago. The Corning values have been out there a long time. I'll give a little bit of a history. But in about 2014, our then head of human resources, Christy Pambianchi, felt that because we were really so much of a global company with people, I think it's still true today that about 70% of our employees are outside the U.S., even though Corning, has been around for almost 170 years and have always been a very U.S.-based company. We had employees in Mexico, we had employees in Taiwan and in Europe, and it was important because we had a lot of people brand new to the company. They weren't around when our values were first rolled out in the 1980s. Let me just see if I can play this little video piece for you, and I'll give you just a little bit of an overview, and then we'll dive in a little deeper. Okay, let's try that again. I think this happened once before. And back to it. Not gonna go for me. Oh, there it is. Let's see. It wants to go. There we go.
Third time's the charm.
All right. Oh, great. I know that it's one of those things we're probably going to have to update it pretty soon. But hopefully, as it flashed through the long history of many of our products, you recognized some of those. And I'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through. So a little bit of the history. It's 169 years, actually. Corning Glass, the original company, was actually started in Brooklyn, New York, and moved to Corning in about 1860s, a little later in the 1860s. So we've been in upstate New York a long time. And really, because of that, and because of Corning being a relatively small town, I think it's about, maybe 12, 15,000 people, many of whom work for the company. That's really defined a lot of the roots of our culture. Because in many of our locations, especially in the U.S. And in some other companies, we are one of the bigger companies. We're also in a lot of small towns. And so when you're in a small town like Corning, New York, you get to know people pretty well. Families get get to know each other. You might go to the same church or synagogue or mosque, and your kids play together in different sports teams and things like that. So it does kind of connect people to each other in some unique ways. And this is actually a picture of our looking kind of through that old archway. We kind of reconstructed that archway from the actual bricks and ceramic tiles that were in our original headquarters building that was on the same site many, many years ago. And if you peek through that archway, you can kind of see the entrance to our headquarters building, which was built not that long ago in the early 1990s. So if you got the little brochure and you saw on the video, these are the 7 Corning values: quality, integrity, performance, leadership, innovation, independence, and the individual. And I'll go through these in a little bit more detail, but I wanted to kind of give you a sense, of what living the values to us means, and give you just a few examples of those. Before I do, let me just see if there's any, turn over to Etty and see if we've got any comments or any questions at this point. Maybe people had a chance to do the homework, had a chance to read over the little brochure of the different values, and you saw that each of those values labels that you see here has kind of a definition in terms of what does it mean. And I'm always amazed as I read that same document that you got many, many years later after it was originally put together, that those statements, at least to me, are still aspirational. They're still making statements about an ideal that we're still striving for. Corning that's where the quality value comes in. Corning is always about continuous improvement. And I think as a company, culturally, with how we live the values, the same thing applies. We can always be improving and be better. But Etty, do you have any comments or any chat questions or anything come in yet?
I actually saw one come through. It said, how did Corning decide on these 7 values?
Well, that's great. That's a wonderful segue to my history slide. I want to make sure that I cover that, or maybe I hit it. So let me speak to it. So in 1980s, in the mid 80s, for those of you who maybe are MBAs or you've studied company cultures, how cultures evolve within companies. And, a lot of different companies have different cultures. The term organizational culture was very much in vogue. There were starting to be some academics writing books about it. And so our then CEO, who was Jamie Houghton, and the Houghton family, you probably saw a picture of the original Amory Houghton flash by there on that timeline. Jamie was the 5th generation of the Houghton family, and he was the last of the Houghton family to run the company. But early on in his tenure in the 1980s, he was reading a lot about organizational culture and how do you create the right kind of culture. And he worked with some outside, consultants, but they worked very closely with the leadership team at the time to define these 7 values. And it went through a lot of iterations. The wordsmithing that you see was meticulous. We're an engineering company, so we tend to spend a lot of time on, the details of every process that we're doing. And so there was quite a lot of time invested in making sure that we had the right set of values with the right words that were meaningful among the leadership team at the time. And the fact that these have survived pretty much unchanged. The only change in wording of these 7 that was done since they first went out in the mid 80s was, instead of the word innovation, the original term was technology. To refer to, we are a technology company. It's all about invention. It's all about the products. It's about It's about engineering the right technology. But the leadership team felt that if we use that term technology, it would sort of kind of restrict it. It might imply that the only people that needed to worry about that value were the engineers or the scientists, because that was their area. And no one else had to worry about technology because we're not all in our manufacturing facilities working on the line and things like that. So they came up with, let's replace that with innovation, because we can all innovate regardless of what we do. We can be in finance, we can be in supply chain, we can be in sales and marketing. We can all come up with new ideas and be more creative and do that. So hope that answers to the person who came up with that question, a good question. But that was really Jamie Houghton, and I had the privilege of knowing him and even working with him and presenting on occasion to his leadership team. Jamie was actually the person who came back and essentially rescued Corning in the early 2000s when we went through the telecommunications, kind of the bubble burst on the internet. Corning was so invested, probably over-invested in one business, that we really, really suffered through that time, actually even worse than we're suffering now, and even worse than the global economic crisis. So Jamie came back from retirement to essentially bring the company back, and he did so masterfully and then turned it over to our current CEO, Wendell Weeks. Great question. Others, Etty?
Yeah, actually, Hank, you did such a great job of answering that first question that you covered the next question that we had too, which was about if the values have been the same since the start of the company. So I'll move to the next question, which is there any significance to the order of the words?
Well, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure I can answer it, but let me take a shot. I think Jamie really drove not just the values in creating them, but his first project, if you will, his first culture change, the very first thing that he invested so much of his time and effort was around quality. Corning was getting really battered by a lot of Japanese competition at the time. This would have been, again, back in early 80s, mid 80s. We were really suffering in terms of our quality of our products. And it wasn't easy, even trying to convince his own leadership team, because everybody was saying, oh, it's all about performance. It's all about getting the product out the door. And Jamie said, if we don't have a quality product, if our quality isn't top notch, that product's just going to come back and it's going to cost us money. So he led an entire culture change effort, which took a number of years. So probably why quality is up there at the top reflects that. Integrity, I think I heard him say, if we don't get this one right, none of the rest of them matter. If we can't live to our word, if we can't treat each other the way we want to be treated with integrity and respect, which kind of also brings in the individual value as well. Really, none of the other values mean anything. So I think the rest of the order, probably not, but I would think that the first two, quality and integrity, are there for a reason. They are, and they continue to be critical. Not that the others aren't, but I can say that the last one, you might, for those of you who are doing interviews with other companies, you can ask them for their list of values and they'll certainly give them to you. In my job, I have the privilege of being able to interact with a lot of fellow HR professionals in other companies, whether it's 3M, Dow, Microsoft, Intel, Johnson & Johnson, some great companies out there. and I've seen a lot of company values lists. The individual, I don't see that very often. Corning's somewhat unique. It's not that maybe other companies might have different words for it, but for us, it's really key and really important. And of course, if you embrace it, then you know that we're all unique as individuals. So how each person even looks at that value statement and how they interpret it is interesting, right? And we have to respect those, because otherwise we're not respecting the value of the individual itself. Great. Well, I could just keep going on the questions there. Etty, do you have any others?
Well, Hank, it seems like you are somewhat clairvoyant, because the next question that came in was, how does Corning value the individual?
Hold on that, okay? I'm going to get to that. Let's jump to the next one. So let's talk about living the values, and let's talk about how we value the individual. Let me give you a personal example, and I'll try to do it without becoming too overly emotional. But in the mid-90s, I was diagnosed with cancer. And fortunately, I have a father who's in the medical profession, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but once he found out, he was like, oh, we're going to get you the best treatment anywhere, New York City. And what that meant was that I had to actually relocate in New York City. I was going to have some preoperative radiation treatments for, I don't know, 3 months. I was then going to have surgery, and then I was going to have more radiation. I was going to be living in New York City. I told my manager at the time, and I still keep in touch with Janet. She's retired. But I told her, I said, Janet, I'm going to have to take about 3 months off. I've got this health issue. And she listened, and she was very supportive. And then we ended the meeting. And then the next meeting I have with her, she said, Hank, I just want to let you know, you don't need to worry, because Corning will pick up the cost of the apartment in New York City where you're going to be. If while you're doing your treatments, you feel maybe you get bored and you feel like you'd like to go into the office, you can go to our office on Fifth Avenue, and we will set up an office for you. And oh, by the way, it's going to be right next to Jamie Houghton's office, because he's just retired. And I thought, oh, and you can get on our Corning plane. And the Corning jet, by the way, does this a lot. It takes people on Mercy flights, employees and non-employees, space permitting, up to New York City on a lot of cases. And so I was able to then come back on the weekends and be with my family, and then go back to New York. To me, that kind of hooked me on Corning. That's how they showed that they really valued me as an individual. Let me get into a few other examples of that. Not just the individual yet. Let's talk about innovation. This is, and you can Google this. This just came out on CNBC. It's an interview of the CNBC reporter talking to our chairman and CEO, Wendell Weeks, about the fact that Corning had just received funding, about over $200 million, because we have this fantastic Valor glass packaging that we're going to be able to provide for the vaccines that hopefully are going to be coming soon, and that the whole world needs. And Corning is uniquely positioned because we can manufacture at scale. We have to make some changes in some of our locations, but it really means great things for a number of our locations. So innovation, that pharmaceutical business is relatively new. Those of you who took chemistry, you probably used our glass beakers and test tubes. We've started producing those in the early 20th century, but in terms of glass, it's evolved to where you basically have the ability to imprint with different genetic information and high volume throughput screening. So that is one way that we're living the innovation value. And then, how are we dealing with, the reaction to George Floyd's death and really how are we getting involved in our different communities around the world, but especially here in the U.S. This is a really nice article by Dana Moss, who is our relatively new Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, giving some very personal examples. She's African American, she has kids, she's talking about how she explains all this to her kids, and then she challenges Corning, and so did Mr. Weeks. His letter that came out a few weeks ago to all of Corning around the world challenged us as employees to tell our leadership, what do we need to do more of? And so that's turning into a lot of support for community support, a lot of funding support for different organizations around justice, just a number of different initiatives that we're doing there. And it really relates, I think, to integrity value. It's not enough. I mean, as a white male, for me to say, yeah, I support these, even going down to participate in a local march, I'm still struggling because that's not enough in my mind for how I can help in a small way, help change the culture that we're dealing with around racial injustice. So that's one way. Another way we're living our values. Let me give you another one. This is probably not a great picture, but the word unity is actually being displayed every night in our former headquarters building, which we call C building. It's actually the tallest building in Corning, New York. It's only 9 floors. And it's being completely redone with some really fantastic architectural glass on the outside. But this building was built in the 1950s. Even before the most recent renovation, which we're still going through on that building, they lit it up. And for example, on Christmas, it would say Noel. But we have posted this message, which comes up every night, which of course is Corning's way to say we are one company united in support of dealing with this pandemic. Of course, it also can relate to dealing with racial injustice as well. So that's another way that we try to live the values. Let me give you another one. I hope this looks kind of cool. This is a screenshot of the inside of our automotive glass display with our curved glass, which of course we started with Gorilla Glass when we sold the very first glass to Steve Jobs for the iPhone. Same kind of manufacturing process, of course, with some revisions is being used with automotive glass. And I'll tell you, you haven't seen anything yet in terms of the interior of the car with what's coming. So again, around innovation, around performance, the performance value, because it's our hope that we can really, we actually are already using Gorilla Glass for windshields with some high-end cars, but the display aspect of our glass in terms of what's possible within the interior of the car is fantastic. So another way that we're doing our best to demonstrate the innovation value. And finally, for the individual, here's one, and this is pretty unique. A lot of companies, and sorry to say that many of you as prospective interns got caught up in what a lot of companies have had to do. And of course, for our employees, it's meant what we're calling shared sacrifice, shared opportunity. Unfortunately, we've had to let some people go completely. I think about 2% of our global population. I think it's around 5% in the US. With our employees who are still with us, we are, freezing hiring. We are freezing pay increases. But in addition, we decided that we could actually save more jobs, save more people by doing this shared sacrifice, shared opportunity program. And what that is for our exempt employee population. So that would mean our management and professional ranks. which can be all the way from A band, that'd be people right out of school, starting out in entry positions on a salaried basis, all the way up to Mr. Weeks and the board of directors. There are salary cuts, but it's kind of progressively done. The lower level you are, the less cut. The higher level you are, like Mr. Weeks, it's 40% of his pay is being cut. Now you could say, well, he's still making lots of money, and you'd be right. But for people down below, that's pretty significant, even 5% cut, right? Or 10% or 15%, depending on what level you are. But we didn't just do that. We didn't just say it's a shared sacrifice, get over it. We said shared opportunity. In exchange for that cut, which right now we hope will only last through the end of this year, knock on wood, things start to turn around. So for that reduction in your salary between, June 1st and the end of December, we will swap with a 50-50 combination of Corning shares, shares of stock, and Corning stock options. And when we launched this program a few weeks ago, Corning stock was, and we locked in this price of $19.65. Corning stock right now, you can look it up. Market is bouncing all around. It's $27.32. So if you do the math, from the time that $19.65 price was locked in, Corning shares have gone up more than 30%, up almost 40%. Now they could still go down, in the market, but that's the shared opportunity. But what's most important to me about that is less around how much money can you make, although if you're willing to keep those shares, that'll keep growing because the stock market over time tends to go up. It's more that you own shares. And as a shareholder, you have a stake in the company, right? And what I'm hoping is that turns into what I would call an ownership mentality, where I own shares. So therefore, I'm going to make my opinions known, right? And so culturally, I think that's a good thing. I'm not sure if Corning will ever get to a point where we're a completely employee-owned company. You may have studied examples of that in your courses. But the more people, the more employees, I think, that own shares, I think that's a good thing. So this is another example of kind of living the values, the performance value, as well as the individual value, as well as the integrity value in designing this program this way. I've talked to a lot of people in other companies. Some have famously said, we're not going to cut salaries, others have, but I've seen very few examples of this kind of a program. So to me, it speaks to the kind of the uniqueness of Corning and its culture. How do we measure how we're doing with the values? I had the pleasure of leading our employee survey process with Beth Shipman, who's one of my colleagues. Beth joined Corning about 5 years ago. She's a master's in industrial organizational psychology. She's even more of an expert on surveys than I am. We do multiple surveys. We call them climate surveys, but this particular data point that you're looking at comes out of our corporate values survey. And about 5 years ago, we repurposed that survey. It's done every year, and it is specifically designed to measure how are we living the Corning values. So the questions on the survey are bucketed by 6 out of the 7 values. And if we had time, I'd do a little quiz and say, which of the 7 do you think we don't survey people about? And I'll give you the answer. And it's the independence value. So we don't have any questions in the survey about the independence value. Because if you read that definition, and maybe you have, it doesn't speak to individual independence. It's not about personal freedom. We do work for a company. We value the individual, but it doesn't mean that everybody, has total freedom on everything. It means company independence. It means we want to stay our own company. we don't want to lose that corporate independence. And again, we could go off on stories where, because we had defined that value clearly, especially among our leaders, we walked away from potential mergers with other companies where we would have lost. Not only would we have lost our independence, we might have lost our company. So that's what the independence, but the rest of the survey does measure the other values from the Corning perspective. And this is just the one question overall, considering everything. How satisfied are you with Corning? And you can see that when we started this survey in 2004, it was 60% said either agree or strongly agree with that statement. And then it topped out last year at 79%, which is quite an increase. We were supposed to have done this survey this year in March and April, and guess what? It was another casualty of COVID. But we're working very directly with our head of HR, who's relatively new, Rob France, and he's still committed to doing the survey. It's just going to be a little bit later. It's probably going to be in July because of so many other things that we had to address. But we really are interested in, especially now, how employees are feeling about being in Corning. And in the survey, we asked these two questions as well. Do you have a good understanding of how to live the Corning values? And you can see 94% of people who responded either agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. And then a pretty healthy chunk, but again, opportunities to improve on the second question. Do people use the Corning values to guide actions and decisions? You can see that the red, there is a little bit of red there, but there's also yellow, which is kind of neither agree or disagree. So there's an opportunity there, I think, to kind of move more people from the yellow to. All right. Maybe you can quickly, let me just see if we got time for this. Let me stop first and ask any other questions or comments that come in.
Yes, we did have another question, Hank. The question is, does Corning participate in local community service events?
Oh, absolutely. Well, in Corning, New York, it's pretty amazing. We have a whole nonprofit wing which supports tons of things in the schools, with the local business community through our Corning Foundation and our Corning Enterprises. But we really encourage in all of our Corning locations for employees to get involved in local activities, fundraising activities, support activities, to go to a school and help, as I did a few years ago with the HR team, rebuild a playground, delivering food. I saw in India where we were delivering food out into the rural areas, providing lots of support, and it's not just through our products, but through our people's time. We have a number of employee resource groups, diversity type groups. They get involved with different segments of the community, whether it's the Indian American community or the Latin American community. A lot of different fundraising and community support for that. So absolutely, we think it's so critical, because we want to be good stewards. We want to be good community members. And like I said, in small towns, we're very well known for that. Great question.
And Hank, just to piggyback off of that real quick, one of the really cool events that we participate in is the Tour de Cuca, and that's an annual charity bike ride that benefits the Food Bank of the Southern Tier.
The Food Bank of the Southern Tier is phenomenal. There's different size food banks around the U.S. There's the small category of food bank, there's the medium, and then there's the large. The Food Bank of the Southern Tier, I think this is right, come in at the medium category of food banks around the country. They were voted last year among all of the food banks in that category, #1. And I've actually worked with them. I've actually worked with their board to help them do a board assessment. They come in once a year and we do a little fundraising thing in our cafeteria in the headquarters where you can purchase a nice little ceramic bowl, and it's a way to demonstrate, the lack of food. And we don't have a lot to eat. We have some, but it's a fundraising opportunity for the food bank as well. So yes, I knew about the Turkey Cuke. I think I know somebody who's ridden in that. Great. Others, Etty, from that?
That was the only one at this point.
Okay. Well, let me just quickly, maybe you can use the chat. Of these 3 values, you see them: quality, integrity, and performance at the top. There's 3 different sort of scenarios. You can type into the chat. Let's take #1. Which of those 3 values do you think most relates to #1, which is refusing a gift from a potential supplier? Type that into the chat, and Betsy can track that. I can see him. I can see him flashing. Oh man, I think everybody is pretty good with that one.
Yep, everyone's on it.
Everybody's on it. What about #2, meeting an important project deadline? Is it quality, integrity, or performance? Oh yeah, this is a pretty sharp group here. You got it. And how about the last one? Checking standard operating procedure to ensure correct steps are followed. Yay! Okay. All right, I think there's one more. You're probably getting bored at this point. Okay, now we have leadership, innovation, independence, and the individual. Let's try #1. Avoiding talking about work outside of work. That's a tricky one.
Yeah, there's some there.
We might actually argue with this one. I don't know. Okay.
That's a hard one.
So I think it's what, remember we said that the independence value is about corporate independence. So now with social distancing, I don't think this will happen, but back in the day, if you were sitting in an airport in a crowded gate with people all around you, and you were chatting with one of your colleagues about the production capability for line 301 in our Irwin plant, there could be somebody listening in on that. So I think that's what that gets at is, we do have, a real need to maintain confidentiality in some places. And so I think that's what it is. How about this #2? After action review to discover what we could improve. Which of those values? Seeing leadership, I'm seeing leadership, I'm seeing leadership. Very good. And leadership really, it's an interesting definition if you look at it on the in your little brochure, because it talks about product leadership as well. Corning is never about me too products. We make products that are unique and that change the world. That's what we aspire to. And so leadership comes in products, but also leadership comes in human leadership and leading. How about #3, seeking out alternative ideas, approaches for how to solve a problem? Oh, great. You got it. And again, we have a lot of tools around the innovation process, many of them sort of owned by our folks at Sullivan Park. But as I said at the very beginning, innovation is a process that we can all aspire to. And finally, being flexible and accepting of coworkers' different cultural background and working style. Yay! And we do a lot of little cutesy assessments sometimes to kind of get at people's different work styles. I run across a lot of those. I get asked for a lot of those, to do team building, things like that. Some of you have heard, maybe you've taken the Myers-Briggs or DISC or, any number of the Strength Finders, any number of those. There's a lot of those out there that we like to use to kind of help reinforce people's differences in a positive way. Great, fantastic. Well, let me just do a quick poll quickly, because just before we hang up, let me see if I can. Am I able to do the poll? Am I able to post the poll? Open the poll. So the 7 values, I'm going to put a poll out there. And open the poll. It's going to say, which of the Corning values has the most meaning for you? I'm going to open this poll now. And go ahead, and I think you can only pick one, which is tough. And let's see what we get. And of course, if we had a lot more time, we could open it up and people could, in fact, it'd be great to be able to do this, but we're probably going to run out of time here. We would ask, well, why? why is this the most important? So I'll give you a couple more minutes. It's like we've got a chunk of people have already voted. All right. And we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll close it. And we'll display the results. And we can see, that's pretty cool. That integrity, great. And that's, as Jamie said, if we don't get this one right, none of the rest of them will really be effective. We had a few votes for quality, a few votes for leadership, and a few for innovation. So that's great. And none for independence, which is okay. A lot of times with my Asia colleagues in Asia, they often think of independence the other way. They think of it as personal freedom. And so I have to kind of say, nah, not exactly. But it's a really key. So thank you very much for that. And I would say, let me just go ahead and close this. I would say maybe the challenge for you, especially around integrity, and this probably won't be that difficult to do with what's going on in the world today. And I know a lot of people in your generation are, it's our only hope. You guys are going to hopefully save what my generation has messed up a little bit. But with that integrity value, you could probably think of many, many ways that you can live it. It's not just about writing it and putting it on a wall. It's really about living it. So good luck to you in applying your favorite Corning value. The last thing that I would say, and this may be difficult for some of you because this is kind of more of a joke for those who were around in the telecom crash and when the internet bubble burst. But like I said, I have the privilege of talking to a lot of HR people, and I get to see a lot of different company values. And so I came across this one, and it's quite old now. It's the 2000 annual report from another company. And I saw these values and, communication, respect, integrity. Wow, we have that. Excellence. Well, that could be like our quality value, right? Respect, the individual maybe, communication. And then I looked a little more closely. Oops, I kind of went over that. And I don't know if the name of that company is known to you, but back in 2000, 2001, Enron was like the most successful company on earth. It was sort of the Amazon of telecommunications world back then, and then they totally fell apart because they didn't live to any of these values really in practice. So it's a watch out. It's a watch out, and we can't take our eye off the ball on our 7 values either. We can always improve it. So listen, I've enjoyed being with you today. I wish you luck getting through. I know it's been tough for a lot of you through this transition period, but I wish you the best. And let's just stop and see if we have any final comments or questions. I know we're over time.
Let's see here. I don't think we have any additional questions, Hank. I think we're good to go.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the intern team for this, and we'll make these slides available through Etty and Jess, and we wish you well. So thanks very much. And do you guys want me to hold on? You want to chat, or we hang up? I mean, if so, you can leave the meeting and say goodbye.
Yeah, we can probably just close it out. Just make sure that it stops recording if you don't mind. But
Oh,
lots of
yes.
thank yous from the team. So thank you again, Hank. That was a great presentation.